Today, what I'd like to talk about is historic White Mills, really the industrial village that Christian Dorflinger built to support the factory here in White Mills, and how White Mills has changed from the time that the factory was in operation here, from 1865 until 1921, to the present day. And if I leave you with nothing else, I think my fundamental message is that White Mills is really a treasure. Were many of these industrial villages built in many parts of the country, but for a variety of reasons, relatively few of them survive today. And White Mills is really the exception. While we've lost some buildings, we'll talk about those as we go through the presentation, much of the industrial village that Christian Dorflinger built to support the factory and how it operated and how the people in the community lived, including the workers who worked at the factory, much of that has survived. And that's very unusual. So you can see not only some of the factory buildings, but you can also see how workers lived in the community, what businesses were established and operated in the community. And it's very, very rare to find that today. If you go to Corning, New York, another major luxury glass producing center, there's very little that's left. There are a few of the large houses that were built by the major leaders in the industry. There's the T.G. Hawkes cutting shop. That's about it. Most everything else is gone. And here you really have the opportunity to see not only how the factories worked, but also the context in which these factories operated, how the workers lived, and how the community was built around the factory operations. And that's really a treasure that you don't find very much. So that's really what I want to talk about today. This is an early map around 1860 that shows the area around White Mills. And there are a couple of things worth pointing out. So here is the Delaware and Hudson Canal running right next to what they called the Lackawaxen Creek at that time. You had Fred Farnham's sawmills on the far side of the river. Those sawmills were painted white, which is how White Mills got its name, the White Mills. If you look up here at the top of the hill, you'll see Captain A.F. or Captain A. Flower. Captain Aaron Flower, was a friend of Dorflinger's. He was a retired riverboat captain on the Hudson River. He operated the Pacific Hotel in New York City. And he owned the farm that is now the Dorflinger Saddam Wildlife Sanctuary. And you can see what was then Butcher's Pond up at the top of the hill. You can see the stream running down through what is White Mills today, down into the Delaware and Hudson Canal. In 1862, Christian Dorflinger purchased that farm from his friend, and in 1863, he and his family moved to White Mills, which was the beginning of the Wayne County Glassworks. And if you look at this map, you can see the canal, you can see the river, you can see the sawmills, and you see a few additional houses, the Daniels farm here as well, but not a lot else. So when Christian Dorflinger came to this area, he was really starting off with a pretty clean slate. And he built one of the largest luxury glass businesses in the country, if not the world, and literally built a community to support the operation of that factory. Captain Flower's farm at the top of the hill was about 600 acres. That's what Christian Dorflinger purchased, and most of that property continues today as the Dorflinger Saddam Wildlife Sanctuary. This picture is really a remarkable piece. This is in the collection of the Dorflinger Glass Museum. It had been owned by June Hardy, Christian Dorflinger's great-great-granddaughter, and it was decorated by William Kristen, who ran the decorating department here at the Dorflinger Factory until about 1875. And on the front of the picture, right under the spout, is the earliest view of the farmhouse up at the top of the hill. And here's a little bit of a close-up of it as well. This is the lock tender's house, right on the Delaware and Hudson Canal. So from where we are now, just across Route 6 and down Lock Street, which is basically one block long. And you can see the lock tender's house here. You can see the lock right there and a small store on the other side of the lock there. The canal was critically important to Christian Dorflinger. It gave him the ability to bring the raw materials he needed to make the glass here to White Mills. It allowed him to get easy access to the coal that he needed for his furnaces, and it also gave him a ready way to deliver his finished products to market. The basin just above the lock was expanded for Christian Dorflinger, and expanded so that he could have up to 4 canal boats at the basin at the same time. Here you see a couple of canal boats in this image, and you'll see these barrels with tin lining, and those were used to bring the sand, the lead, and the potash up to White Mills so that the materials wouldn't get contaminated by the coal dust that was otherwise being transported in the canal boats. And here you see the first bridge across the canal and the Lackawaxen River. Christian Dorflinger paid to have that bridge built because he knew that in 1868 the railroad was coming to White Mills as well, and he wanted to have ready, good access to the railroad, giving him great transportation options here in White Mills. Here is an image of the early train station with a great locomotive, and you can see the village of White Mills in the background. This photo is probably about 1875 because you can see St. Joseph's Catholic Church back there in the background. And to orient you again, the farm where the family lived when they first came to White Mills was up at the top of the hill. This is an early photograph of the farmhouse and the Dorflinger family. Originally, there were 2 separate buildings that were put together to create one larger house. And here you see Mrs. Dorflinger and some of the Dorflinger children on the property. Really nice early image. Here is a drawing of the St. Charles Hotel. Once Christian Dorflinger established the factory here in 1865. He went on a rapid building spree to build up the factory and also to build up the community of White Mills. And in 1868, he started construction on the St. Charles Hotel, the building you see here. That was so he would have a place for his business associates, his customers, and his friends to stay in White Mills when they visited him and the factory. Here's the same picture. On the one side, you get a great view of the factory in the center, the bridge going across the canal on this side, and then the factory right here with some of the surrounding community as well. And on the other side of the picture, you have a terrific view of the St. Charles Hotel. And then in 1873, Christian Dorflinger built a wing, an addition to the hotel that was at right angles to the St. Charles, and that became known as the Big House. After that was constructed, the family moved from the farmhouse at the top of the hill down here. This is right at the bottom of Charles Street and the corner of what is now Route 6 as well. And that's where the family lived for the remainder of their time in White Mills. So this picture is just a wonderful example, again, decorated by William Christen, who ran the decorating department for Christian Dorflinger. This is the Eugene Dorflinger house. Eugene Dorflinger was Christian Dorflinger's cousin. He ran the general store in White Mills, and he was also the station agent of the Erie Railroad. So you have the house here, you have the gazebo next to it, and then I'll show you an image of the store here. This was the general store. In the first wagon, you have Eugene Dorflinger, and in the second wagon, we believe that is John Dorflinger, his son. And there's the store, and we believe that that is Clotilde King Dorflinger, Eugene Dorflinger's wife there. And then in the background, you have the carriage house, and then the Eugene Dorflinger house just above that as well. And this is today the corner of Elizabeth Street, or Charles Street here, and then Route 6 down in front of the store. Here is an interior view of the store. This was a typical dry goods store for the time, but interestingly enough, what do you see on the counter? Cut glass as well. That would have been very unusual in a dry goods store in an area other than this one. Same thing is true for this view as well. So on the left, you have Eugene Dorflinger Jr., and on the right, you have John Christian Dorflinger. They were two sons of Eugene Dorflinger. Both of them were involved in the factory operations here in White Mills. Eugene ran the acid department and also took the photographs of the glass for the trade catalogs. And John Dorflinger was the last foreman of the cutting department until the factory closed in 1921. After the factory closed, John purchased much of the contents of the factory from the Dorflinger children, and he opened a small museum and a shop in his father's general store. And that's where you see Eugene Jr. and John in this photograph. And John ran this museum and shop from about 1926 until his death in 1964. And in John's hand, you have a bud vase cut in Dorflinger's Old Colony pattern, and that is one of the pieces from the dresser set that John had made to give his bride in 1917 as his wedding gift to her. And if you go upstairs in the museum, you will see not only that bud vase, but the complete dresser set as well. And there are some other, it's a little hard to pick them out in this photograph, but there are some really interesting examples of Dorflinger glassware, including the factory samples for many of the special orders that John had purchased from the Dorflinger children. And John supported himself by selling some of the glass that he had purchased from the Dorflinger family. He also purchased cutting equipment from the factory, furniture from the factory as well. About 10 years ago, we had the opportunity to acquire what was left of that collection. We brought 3 U-Haul trucks loads of material up here to White Mills from John's son's home down in New Jersey, and you will see lots of that material used in our exhibits and displays upstairs. John thankfully saved many wonderful things that otherwise would have probably been thrown away or destroyed. And I give John a great deal of credit for having the foresight to preserve much of the important history of the Dorflinger factory. And here's John, not too long before his death in 1964, sitting at his desk. That was his desk when he was the foreman of the cutting department in the Dorflinger factory. He's sitting on his stool. This was in his shop and museum, and upstairs you'll see the desk and the stool as well. In 1964, the Everhart Museum mounted an exhibit of Dorflinger glass, and that was the first museum exhibit of Dorflinger glass ever mounted or put on display. And much of the glass that was exhibited came from John's collection. Here's a map of White Mills, and now we're about in the early 1870s, and you can see how rapidly White Mills was beginning to grow and develop. In the center here, you have the glass factory itself, and you can see some of the buildings that were starting to take place in what we now call the upper factory. These were the early buildings in the factory. At the corner right here, between Charles Street and what was then Main Street in White Mills, was the Eugene Dorflinger store. You can see some of the family homes. Here is the St. Charles Hotel on the opposite corner from the store. We'll come back to these in a few minutes, but you'll see tenement houses right here. These were the earliest, the 7 earliest homes built for workers in the Dorflinger factory, built from about 1866 to 67. Christian Dorflinger quickly realized that he was getting the factory up and running, that he needed skilled craftsmen to help get the factory started, and so he brought 3 families from France to come and help get the factory started. So this is a map of the village of White Mills, and here is the White Mills School right here, right on Main Street. That was the first school. This is the big house. This is the addition that was added on to the St. Charles Hotel with 2 of the Dorflinger children sitting on the steps. We have very few images of the interior of the St. Charles or the big house. This is one that we do have. This is of Christian Dorflinger's 75th birthday party. So here's Christian Dorflinger at the head of the table. You can see 2 of his sons, Louis over here, who was the treasurer of the company, Charles here, who worked with his father in the day-to-day management of the factory here in White Mills. His wife, Elizabeth Hagen Dorflinger, would be down at the far end of the table. And sitting next to Christian Dorflinger is Fred Saddam, his grandson. This cup also has, decorated by William Christen, has views of the factory property. Here is the factory here. You can see some of the workers' houses here. Again, the bridge going across the Lackawaxen here. And on the other side, you have the blowing shop at the factory, in the early factory as well. And this painting, also done by William Christen in about 1875, shows the factory here in the center of the photograph, the farm up at the top of the hill, the first bridge across the Lackawaxen, the St. Charles Hotel over here, the store, the Eugene Dorflinger store here at the corner, and St. Joseph's Catholic Church right here. We think this painting was done just before St. Joseph's was finished in 1875, because it has 1 door on the front and the church actually had 2. Here's a photograph of St. Joseph's Catholic Church. Unfortunately, we've lost some buildings in White Mills. St. Joseph's is one of those. And generally, the culprit has either been neglect or deterioration or fire. And in the case of St. Joseph's, it was fire. This engraving was done and published in the History of Pike, Wayne, and Monroe Counties in 1886. So you can see now how rapidly the factory was growing. The early factory was here, the newer factory down here, the new cutting shop, the building we're in right now. There was a second blowing shop added at the end of the cutting shop. Perpendicular in the building in the back was the decorating department, where William Christen worked. The shorter parallel building was the engraving department. Packing department and showroom were here in the center. The original tenement houses for the workers were these small cottages on Charles Street. Interestingly enough, Christian Dorflinger had this building added in, a factory office, 2 years before the factory office right across the driveway was built, so it doesn't look anything like the actual factory office. But a great view of how quickly and rapidly the factory was expanding. And here is a second engraving in the same publication of the interior of one of the blowing shops. And finally, an engraving of the top floor of this building, the cutting shop, showing how the cutting shop was laid out. This photograph of the factory is about 1890. The big fence around the factory was added for security. This was a period of labor unrest in the factory, and the fence was intended to protect the factory. The office building on the left, the cutting shop on the right, the early blowing shop, the large first blowing shop in the back. We have relatively few views of the interior of the office building as well. This is one view upstairs. The office building housed the bookkeepers and accountants. It's where the workers were paid. The top floor was the showroom in White Mills. So here is a view of the top floor. Here's the other half of the top floor as well. You had these long tables with mirrored tops with the glass put out on the tables so that buyers could come to White Mills, look at the glass, and then place their orders. This is a view looking down Charles Street, down toward what would be Route 6 today. Here in the foreground on the right are the scales for weighing materials as they came into to the factory. And here's a view looking up Charles Street as well. Again, you can see the scales there, and you can see how quickly White Mills is being built out. This is a view looking at White Mills from across the Lackawaxen River. This is the newer bridge here going across the Lackawaxen. Here on the left is the school. This building right here was the French restaurant. And so White Mills had a French restaurant. The blowing shop and the factory were right in here. This was a hotel as well. And that hotel eventually was moved first across the street and then added to the front of the French restaurant when Christian Dorflinger built a third blowing shop right here next to the second one. And the combination of that hotel and the French restaurant later became the White Mills Hotel. This is a view on Main Street looking with Honesdale behind you, looking toward Hawley, and you can see the factory buildings here. And this was the central business district of White Mills, and you can see it was a fairly bustling place. Certainly as the factory developed and prospered, the community grew and businesses were established as well. Here's the Methodist Church. Christian Dorflinger built the Methodist Church, donated it to the town. This is literally right across Route 6 today from the factory property here. And that's the one church in White Mills that still exists today. In 1892, there was a severe fire at the factory. This photograph shows you the effects of the fire. This building here is the building we are in right now. Here were the boilers for the factory located right here that provided power to operate the cutting equipment. Here was the blowing shop down at the end. The office building is right over here on the right side of the photograph. The damage to the factory was quite extensive. Only the office building and the pothouse where the clay pots for the furnaces were made escaped serious damage, but Christian Dorflinger immediately rebuilt the entire factory, and the following 20 years were the peak periods of the factory's operations. On Main Street, just across the street from where we are now, was the drugstore and the doctor's office. So White Mills basically had everything that you needed. This was the Nelson Hotel. It was also on Main Street, and the proprietor of the Nelson Hotel, William Smith, built an opera house in 1897 adjacent to the hotel. And here you can get a view both of the hotel on the right and the front of the opera house here. And now we're looking from Honesdale behind us, looking into the center of White Mills, and with St. Joseph's Catholic Church directly in the distance there in the center. And then here is a view of the other side of the opera house. This is a view of the interior of the opera house with one of the companies of actors here. The opera house, also called the Florence Theater, was used for theatrical performances, minstrel shows, and increasingly over time, a variety of community gatherings. And here's a ticket for the Florence Theater, for the balcony. This hotel was built by Dobelman across the river and between the baseball field and the train station. Later on, this hotel was operated by the Murphy family, and their son Eddie Murphy played on the White Mills baseball team and went on to fame and glory with the Philadelphia Athletics. This was the new train station in White Mills next to the Murphy Hotel, which gave the company and the family and the residents of White Mills pretty easy access going on east and all the way on to New York City. And then here is the White Mills Hotel, right at the corner of what is now Elizabeth Street and Route 6 today. You can see there's the back part that originally was the French restaurant and the front part that was moved and added on to the building, and then the rest of the business community heading down Main Street. The last blowing shop added to the factory was this one, built in 1902, and in 1905 Christian Dorflinger added a coal gasification plant. So he brought bituminous coal from western Pennsylvania all the way across the state. That bituminous coal was converted to natural gas, and that's what was used in that new blowing shop. And again, here we're looking now down Main Street in the direction of Honesdale. You can see how built up Honesdale had become. This home was Charles Dorflinger's home. It is the large gray house right above our parking lot in the back, now occupied by the Lehman family. And as you can see behind the house, there's the smokestack for the upper blowing shop. So it was located literally right above the factory. Nice, beautiful home, and that home has survived. You can also see some of the beautiful ironwork here. That has survived as well, that went all the way down along the remaining houses at the bottom of Charles Street. Here's a new boiler being added to the factory. You can see the cutting shop, the brick side here, and then the stone side here. So this would have been just directly behind us back out here. And here's the top photograph of the top floor of the cutting shop, very much like the engraving, that 1886 engraving. This is a view of the acid etching department. This was a pretty major transformation for the company. Beginning in 1907, Christian Dorflinger began to develop a line of glassware, an art glass line, that used hydrofluoric acid to etch the design onto the glassware. And instead of having workers who had to go through a 5 to 7 year apprenticeship program to learn how to become a cutter, you could train these young women to do the marking for the acid etching relatively quickly and easily, and they could produce a substantial amount of this glassware fairly quickly and fairly inexpensively compared to the heavier, elaborate cut glass that had been the core part of the company's business. So I just love this photograph with all of the women, and that's what they're doing. They're marking the designs using templates onto the glass blanks that are covered in wax to prepare them to be dipped in the acid to etch the design onto the glassware. This is John Dorflinger in the grinding room, and he's grinding and smoothing the tops of tumblers. In 1915, Christian Dorflinger passed away. This is the beginning of the funeral procession to take his body from the home to the train station to be taken to Brooklyn to be buried in Greenwood Cemetery. And here's the start of the procession. All of the factory workers lined the route from the home to the train station to show their respect for Christian Dorflinger and the business he'd built and the lives that he'd provided for his workers. And in the background here, you see the Murphy Hotel. And here is the casket arriving at the train station with some of the Dorflinger family members in the car behind. And finally, this is a Christmas card from Dorothy Saddam. Fred and Dorothy Saddam were the last occupants of the farm at the top of the hill. And Dorothy Saddam was a big lover of dogs. This is one of her many dogs here. If you go to the Dorflinger Sanctuary and walk around the lake, you'll get to a place called Puppy Point, where all of her dogs now remain. And this shows you the farmhouse where they lived. When Dorothy passed away, the estate transferred to become the Dorflinger Saddam Wildlife Sanctuary. That had been the dream and the wish of Fred and Dorothy. And Roger Blau, who was her attorney, a former president of United States Steel, who married a Hawley girl, lived in Hawley, was I think, largely responsible for helping bring about the transition to create what is now the Dorflinger Saddam Wildlife Sanctuary, and including the Dorflinger Glass Museum and the Wildflower Summer Music Festival as well. So now we're going to turn to today. This is now what was the farmhouse up at the top of the hill. And if you look right in the center right here, from this point right is the original farmhouse. And from this point left was a new wing built by the Dorflinger Sanctuary in 1988 to form the Dorflinger Glass Museum. And here's another view, shows the same image with the museum. And now this is all, this entire structure is all the home to the Dorflinger Glass Museum. The other side, with the lake behind you, looking back up the hill, again, you can see on the left the original structure, on the right the additional wing added on for the museum displays, and above these buildings is the new structure, the Roger Blau building, and that houses the sanctuary's administrative offices. There's also a nice boardroom and meeting room upstairs there as well. And here you see Trout Lake, the renamed Butcher's Pond, that is just a beautiful asset of the Dorflinger Sanctuary property. The dam at the edge of the lake feeds the stream that comes all the way down through White Mills, past the back of the factory here, and then at the time on into the Delaware and Hudson Canal, now on into the Lackawaxen River. This is the 1911 firehouse. Now, originally the firehouse was located across what is now Route 6, right at the corner next to the bridge. But when the bridge was expanded and enlarged, the firehouse was threatened. And so Wayne Stevens and a number of the members of the White Mills Fire Department arranged to have the fire hall moved from that corner across Route 6, and it now sits directly behind us, right next to the old Coca-Cola bottling plant, and between the bottling plant and the old Eugene Dorflinger store. So the fire hall now has a nice new home, and it is also part of the Dorflinger Saddam Wildlife Sanctuary. So definitely one of the restoration successes. This is the lock tender's house down at the bottom of Lock Street. Walter Barb purchased the lock tender's house and restored it and donated it to the Dorflinger Sanctuary. Beautiful structure. You can recognize it from the images you saw of the lock before. Here's the front. On the left-hand side, you have a small canal museum. On the right-hand side, you have a rental unit as well. And if you look at the front where the grass is, that's where the lock used to be, and the foundation is where the little store was, right across from the lock. So another wonderful example of a piece of property in White Mills of historic significance that has been saved and preserved. The factory buildings, there were originally about 30 buildings as part of the Dorflinger factory, some of them just small wooden sheds. The two that have survived are the factory office building on the left and the cutting shop on the right. Fortunately for us, they were the two best of the Dorflinger factory buildings. You can see a worker's house directly behind the office building there. 3 stories on the cutting shop. The annealing ovens were on the ground floor. On the middle floor and the top floor, both of those were cutting shops. And the middle floor is now our event space. The top floor is our main exhibit space here at the Dorflinger Factory Museum. And here's an exterior view of the office. Office built in about 1888, cutting shop built 1883 to 1885. Here's now the entrance to the main museum. The brick addition was added when the last steam boiler was installed in the factory. Boiler room is down at the end of the hall here on this floor. In the back, this foundation was the machine shop that kept all the equipment in the factory operating. Most of the other buildings are down, and what we've tried to do is establish a park-like setting here in the center of White Mills that's used by a number of our local residents as well as our visitors to the museum. Here's an interior view of the office building, beautiful chestnut and cherry woodwork. This is on the main floor. Looks, and in the back, small office area that was Christian Dorflinger's office, marked private. Here's the original pay desk and the window where workers would come up to receive their pay. In the front entrance, you have an accountant's desk as well. Upstairs was the showroom. Now it's our early glass gallery, exhibiting glass from the Brooklyn years to the early years here in White Mills, up until about 1875. Our main exhibit space is on the top floor of this building. We have exhibits focused on blowing, cutting, and engraving, how the glass cutting process operated and worked, a dining room to show you how this glass was used in society, exhibits focused on Dorflinger's special order glassware, probably the most famous being the glassware made for the White House. Dorflinger provided glassware for 8 succeeding presidential administrations, beginning with Abraham Lincoln and ending with Woodrow Wilson. And then some of the art glass lines that the company produced starting in about 1900 up until the factory's closing in 1921. Wherever we can, we also like to show examples of salesmen's catalog pages and the glass that's illustrated on those pages to help our visitors understand how Dorflinger glass can be identified and authenticated. This is a great special exhibit we had a few years ago of modern glass sculptures by the glass artist Christopher Reese, who lives over in Tunkhannock. Beautiful work. One of our, I think, our most popular and most successful special exhibits. This room works very well for special exhibits and also for community organizations and events. Finally, the restored boiler room down at the end of the hall, the last boiler installed in the factory in 1917 from the Erie City Iron Works in Erie, Pennsylvania. We use this room as our board meeting and a smaller event space as well. Outside the factory buildings, we have the White Mills Community Trail. The idea of the community trail was to provide a central parking area so that people could come to the museum, park here, but also have ready access to the fire hall, to the lock tender's house, to the glass workers' cottages, and to the remainder of White Mills. So we have 2 parking areas above and below. We have trails that connect up to Ash Street and down to Route 6. And we also have a series of 8 interpretive panels that talk about the history of White Mills, the history of the glass company, Dorflinger glass and how it was made, and the community and community activities as well. And here are some of the interpretive panels going down to the fire hall. And here's an example of one of the interpretive panels. Now, these are getting a little dated. We've built the White Mills Community Trail as a joint project with the Dorflinger Sanctuary, and it's getting on to be about 15 years now. The old fiberglass technology on these signs is starting to break down. So Hank Loftus and I are busily at work working on new and improved versions of the signs. It's about time to have a fresh set made and installed. One of the great things that you can see around White Mills are these beautiful dry-laid stone walls. So this is the stone wall leading to the entrance to the museum here. All of this work done by hand. Well, some of those are pretty big stones that had to be moved by block and tackles. No mechanical equipment at the time, and they're in just as good a condition today as they were 100 years ago when they were built. Now we're going to start a walk up Charles Street to see some of the remaining buildings in White Mills. And the first one we're going to look at is the Eugene Dorflinger store. Here you can see the front of the store, and here's a view of the front and the side. Another view of the side. This is an example of some wonderful elements of the history of White Mills, but that are really starting to deteriorate. So these buildings have been vacant now for probably about 15 or 20 years, and the wear and tear is really beginning to show on them. Behind the store was the carriage house on the left and the photography studio on the right. Photography studio is really interesting because on the right-hand side, it's all windows. So that's how you got enough natural light in to photograph the glass. And in some of these early catalogs, what they would actually do is paint the front of the glass with white paint to make the designs or the patterns stand out. So it's really neat to have the photography studio where that work was done. Here's the gazebo. Originally, remember, it was right next to Eugene Dorflinger's house. Now it was moved down to behind the store. It's definitely the worse for wear today. And then finally, the Eugene Dorflinger house itself. It's hard to recognize without the wraparound porches, but it does have these nice decorative elements, the trim around the eaves and also the trim around the windows and the doors. Now, across the street from the store and the Eugene Dorflinger house were the St. Charles Hotel and the Manor House, the big house where the family lived. Sadly, that property, those structures are gone, and they were replaced with this relatively new house, beautiful home, and I believe there are some elements left over from the St. Charles, including maybe a couple of stained glass windows that had been in the original home. But the original St. Charles Hotel and the Manor House were destroyed by fire in 1962. But the ironwork and the stonework still remain. So you can see the beautiful ironwork and the stonework where the entrance was to the St. Charles, and it goes up Charles Street. So just again, beautiful workmanship going up the hill. For moving further up the hill, here are two larger structures that would have been homes for more senior people, foremen of different departments in the factory. This home was originally Catherine Dorflinger's, one of Christian Dorflinger's daughters, again directly across the street from the St. Charles and from the big house. And just above that home was Charles Dorflinger's home, looking very much like the original image, now occupied by the Lehman family. Really nice structure and in great condition. And here looking down Charles Street, you can see it on the right-hand side of the street. Now we get to those original tenement houses that you saw on the map. There were 7 of them. And as I said, those were built 1866 to 67 to house those first 3 families of glassblowers that Christian Dorflinger brought from France to help get the factory started. They were all related to each other. So they were the Laternus family, the Schild brothers, and the Lutz brothers. And this is workers' house number 1, the first one. Again, another example, Walter Barb purchased this home, restored it, sold it, now occupied by Ralph Liberta. Workers' house number 2, as you can see, really substantially modified from the original version of these houses. The original version looked very much like what Christian Dorflinger's workers would have known back in the Alsace region of France, probably deliberately so. Over the years, this has been enlarged and expanded with more Victorian touches added to it as well. Workers' house number 3 is gone. That's the vacant lot right here. This is workers' house number 4, number 5, number 6, and number 7. Betty and I restored number 4 about 3 years ago. The one next to it is owned by the Dorflinger Sedam Wildlife Sanctuary. It has been restored to the way the house would have looked in 1872, so with a couple of improvements from the original versions of the homes. The next house owned by Kevin Edwards, and the final house lovingly restored by Ron and Sally Talega, and then they live in the home right next door to it as well. These are really about the earliest residential structures in White Mills, and it's great that so many of them have survived and are being preserved. So this is what workers' house number 4 looked like when we started. Originally, these homes had wood shake roofs. After that, they were replaced with the standing seam iron roof. You might have seen some of those as well on the Eugene Dorflinger store property down at the bottom of the hill. And then the front porch was completely eliminated here, and the house had been added onto in a variety of ways. Here's an advertisement for that sheet iron roofing that was used to replace the shake roofs in many of the homes in White Mills. This is a view looking at the back of workers' house number 4. This was at the time that Lollipop Pond was dedicated. So everybody was gathered for the dedication of Lollipop Pond for the swimming hole. And then this is workers' house number 4. The one next to it, workers' house number 5. You can see all the additions that were added on to the back of the structure. All right, this is for today. Much of that addition we kept on the back, but otherwise very much like these houses would have looked either in 1867 or shortly thereafter. Originally, they were board and batten siding, and then the clapboard siding was added on about 1872 to dress them up a little bit more. Originally, you had a porch that ran all the way across the front. Pretty quickly, they realized you could enclose half of the porch and create a much nicer and larger bedroom on the inside. What makes 4 really interesting to us is this additional room on the side. Now, we had suspicions about what this room was, but as we did the renovation, we uncovered this door on the outside. So obviously, this was a space where you wanted to have an access from outside into that room. And that led us to believe that this home and the sanctuary's home next to it were originally occupied by Francois and Nicholas Lutz. And here's the sanctuary's home here. Again, that's number 5. Number 6, Kevin Edwards. Number 7, Sally and Ron Talegas, and their home, the mustard-colored home, down there at the end, which is also where Ray Laternus grew up. So this is Francois Lutz. This is his brother Nicholas. And this is the kind of work they did. They did these lampwork flowers, these poinsettias, for stoppers and for paperweights. And they did these at home. And they used an alcohol burner and a bench with a bellows to increase the temperature. And they would make each of these tiny little leaves and flower petals out of glass, and then bring them into the factory, assemble them, and make them into stoppers and paperweights. And they were paid separately by Dorflinger for that work. So they needed a place to do that work, and we believe that room was the workshop. And it's most likely this was Francois's house. He was the older brother, a contemporary of Christian Dorflinger's. They trained together, and his brother Nicholas probably lived in the house right next door, so he would have easy access to the workshop. So we really were delighted when we found that doorway. And again, a little closer up view of the beautiful job that Ron and Sally Talega did restoring their workers' house and then their home next to it. Here's an example of glassware made for Madeline Laturnis. This is in the Laturnis collection upstairs. Here is a beer mug made for Claude Schild, one of the other original glassmakers who came in this group. And another side view of that mug, that's also in the Ray Laturnis collection as well. This house directly across the street was just a little bit later. So this is probably 1869, 1870. It has the same general layout, the same format as the original workers' cottages just right across the street. And this is being restored by the young Beach Lake bakery couple. Really very nice folks, and they're in the process of restoring it. Here's what it looks like today. They've done some beautiful stonework in the back. I love the way they added this little addition and used the slope roof just as the same as the house has here. So we're seeing a lot of these properties right along Charles Street being saved and preserved and really brought back. Just above that house is the log cabin here, another example of Dorflinger's beautiful stonework. This home was originally built for Dwight Dorflinger, one of Christian Dorflinger's grandsons, who was working in the factory business as well. He didn't like the log house, so he never actually lived here. Instead, I'll show you in just a couple of minutes the home he ended up living in, which is really a beautiful home and a Dorflinger family home today. This is an example of one of the duplexes. So this is I believe the Betty Laturnis home. Originally, there would have been a door here on this side. One family would live on the right side. One family would live on the left side. Now it's been put together, the left side. Now it's been put together into a single home. But an example, another surviving example of homes for workers in the community. I love this house. This was a worker's house as well. And this is Sue Grazadillo's home. And I especially like when Mark and Sue built their garage, that they replicated the original workers' cottages for their garage. So just a really nice touch that helps tie into the rest of the community. And I love this home as well. Just another gorgeous home on the upper right-hand side on Charles Street as you're going up the hill. This is Stegner Street connecting Charles Street on the right with Elizabeth Street on the left. This was another one of the early workers' houses. This is about 1872. And they were rapidly making improvements in these houses as they go along. One of the really smart improvements they made is they made this house about 2 or 3 feet deeper, which made the inside of the rooms more open and airy and more usable. So this house didn't look so great right about this time. This is probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It's now been restored, lovingly restored by Sarah Claus and her father Pete, and they did a beautiful job on this one as well. And you can see it's a little bit bigger than the others, so a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more roomy. So they were adapting and changing as they went along. Right across the street, this is Steve Ficken's home. It was another early workers' house. Steve did all of the electrical work here for us at the museum. As you go up Stegner Street on the right, this was the Madeline Laturnis home. Now, Joseph Laturnis, her husband, died about within the year after they arrived here in White Mills, and Madeline moved to this house and ran it as a boarding house. It was in pretty substantial disrepair. Here's another example of it. And so the property was purchased, the old house was taken down, and it's now been replaced by a new house. Right across the street, this was the Charles Northwood home. Charles Northwood ran the acid etching department here from 1907 until 1915, when he moved to Sandwich, Massachusetts, and established another glass company called Northwood Packwood in Sandwich. Now we're coming down Elizabeth Street, and we've made a right turn on School Street. And this is the new brick school. And so great structure. You had the early school right on Main Street, and now the new brick school here. And now it's a wonderful residence as well, right, Lindsay? Yeah. And right at the end of School Street is Pip Tegel's home. Pip is Christian Dorflinger's great-great-granddaughter. This was the home that was built for her grandfather, Dwight Dorflinger. I love this home. It looks like a European hunting lodge with this really rough stonework. Just a really interesting and neat structure as well. Now, last street down is Evergreen Street. First house in on the right. This house was occupied by a man named Walter Graham. Walter was an Englishman, came here in 1896, brought stone engraving to the Dorflinger factory, and he was responsible for creating the Vanderbilt wedding set. You see lots of examples of that upstairs here in the museum. And finally, the St. Charles, the White Mills Hotel, right at the corner of Route 6 and Elizabeth Street, as it looked a couple of years ago. I think that's about when I took this photo. Sadly, this has been the latest structure to be destroyed by fire just a few months ago. And so now this is what we have, the empty lot. Everything's been cleaned up, but it's sad that we lost that property as well, because it does have an interesting history for the community. There is the Methodist Church. Again, as I said, the last church in White Mills from the old days that has survived today. This are some early, again, structures on the left as you're going down what is now Route 6 toward Honesdale. The Wellwood Silk Mill on Route 6 going toward Honesdale. And this is another worker's home. Hugo Lilliquist lived in this house, an engraver for Dorflinger. And here's another view of the home. This is a little farther up Route 6 toward Honesdale. Different immigrant groups came to White Mills over time. Originally, the French and the Germans, then the English and the Irish, and finally the Scandinavians. And this end of White Mills was known as Swedetown because was the latest area to be built out, and that's where many of the Scandinavians built their homes. So a nice structure that still exists today. Finally, I'm going to close with a picture of the 1907 White Mills baseball team. John Dorflinger was the manager. Here he is right here. Eddie Murphy is right here, standing the second man from the left, who went on to play for Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics. And of course, in 1913, when the Athletics played the New York Giants in the World Series, Eddie's friends in White Mills made a one-of-a-kind, full-size cut-glass baseball bat, presented it to Eddie in Philadelphia at the start of the second game of the series, and the bat is upstairs in the collection of the museum here. And that's, I think, a good way to end our quick tour of White Mills. So thank you all very much.